had a certain kind of laid back kind of attitude going on, and I couldn't believe that it could stand up like that in the tank. I never know what animals are going to do when they're in the tank, and it could kind of sat up like that, and I just couldn't believe it. And I said, that's great. Hold that. Eventually don't do, but this is a Tahitian glass sausage. Great names a lot of these have. And they're sea cucumbers, different kind of animal. This is another sea cucumber called a black spotted sea cucumber, and this is a stiff-footed sea cucumber. Again, when I was beginning to photograph this animal, all of these beautiful tree-like projectiles were all withdrawn. It just looked kind of like a little white shag rug. And I was told it was very important. It was an important sea cucumber, not often seen, and if I waited long enough, that these projections, which are feeding tentacles, would emerge. And it took days. I mean, I kept going back to it and back to it. They'd emerge a little bit, then they'd retract, and then they'd emerge a little bit more. But this was like full emergence, and it was just so extraordinary. And this too, this is called a petal sea cucumber. So this red part typically is withdrawn, and it just looks like a pink, hard lump. But when they feel safe enough, and when they're hungry, and when their sensory values that go on in this in the tentacles, they emerge. This is probably something most people are familiar with. These are barnacles, gooseneck barnacles, not rare, not unusual, but I've always loved them, and I loved having the opportunity to really look at them and photograph them like a still life. To me, this is like a still life, even though they're very alive here. This was a big surprise. Probably many of you have seen these beautiful cowrie shells that are called egg cowries. They're pure white, super shiny. I have one on my dashboard. I've always loved them. But I never knew what the animal looked like that lived inside. And this was the expedition that went to the Central Pacific, and a diver brought up one of these egg cowries and said, just wait until the animal emerges because you're going to be shocked. And who would know or even imagine that an animal that lived in a pure white shell would look like the night sky, which is what this animal looks like. This is in this picture, there's a series in the book. This is the final one where the animal is completely engulfing its own shell. Of course, it makes that shell. Scientists have, everyone that I've asked, have no idea why that is. But there is some adaptive advantage to that, but it's quite amazing. It's another wild urchin, and these are called airstrip nudibranchs from the Central Pacific. Now here's a case where a crab is really trying very hard to fool us into thinking that it's actually a sea pen, which he's holding on his back. And he's got two little hooks there that are keeping that sea pen there. The sea pen probably gets some mobility out of the arrangement, maybe some table scraps. This is another same kind of crab, only this crab is holding up a fire sponge, which I've had the unfortunate experience of touching fire sponges. They're extremely painful. They have these little spicules that go into your skin and just burn, like your skin is burning. So this is a nice defensive advantage that this crab has by having that poised there. This is one of the tiniest animals I photographed. It's called a dodo. It's 0.2 inches from one end to the other. And it's like a little glass figurine. This is a Puget Sound king crab. Beautiful animal. Everyone was crazy about it. This is a close-up. And somebody asked me, are you like accentuating the colors of your photographs? Do you like punch them up in Photoshop? And I go, no. I mean, with this realm of life, the real challenge is rendering the colors as vibrant as they actually are. Because, the best digital cameras have their limits that can't render it, especially the iridescence, that I think I showed you some of the jellyfish already. That's really kind of hard to capture because cameras can't quite get there. Our eyes can see quite a bit, and then of course I learned that actually some of these invertebrates have eyes that can see way more than our eyes can see. But I did the best I could, but there was no accentuating that needed to occur. Actually, the animals themselves are beyond what I'm able to translate photographically. This is the dock at Friday Harbor Marine Lab on San Juan Island. It's been there over 100 years. This marine lab is part of the University of Washington. It's kind of like a West Coast Woods Hole. Probably many people have heard of Woods Hole. Very famous marine lab in Massachusetts. And this is I referred to Dr. Gustav Pauli, mentor and muse, credited in the book. He's taught me probably more than any other single person about the world of marine invertebrates, and he's enthusiastic like a kid, and one of the world's leading experts in this realm of life. So what he's doing here is he's like searching on this rubber bumper on the dock for marine invertebrates, and he's finding all kinds of things. So it's just, amazing where you can find these animals and where they hang out and lurk. This is the research vessel at the Friday Harbor Marine Lab called the Centennial. We're with students here. We're going out and we're actually dredging. Since it's not a coral reef habitat, we can send this apparatus down and kind of scrape it on the bottom for a little bit and then bring it up and let it loose over these trays, and we don't know what's going to be there, but it's always a treasure trove of wonderful algae and invertebrates usually. So here are the students all picking through. We're trying to separate things out into various categories. One of the sea cucumbers that I showed you a little bit earlier that I said looks like a pink lump most of the time, that's what this is right there. So that's really what it typically would look like if you saw it. So there's various subjects in there waiting for their portraits later. Here's some mollusks, which we kind of kept separate. And this is the lab actually at the Friday Harbor Marine Lab. So these are called sea tables, and there's fresh water that's being pumped in continuously, which keeps the animals really happy for research and observation, and in my case for photography. And I had a little corner set up in the back where I had my aquariums and various equipment items set up at the ready. And I'm photographing here a beautiful little hermit crab, the white-hand hermit, one of my favorites. Aptly named white-hand hermit. And this is a Tritonian nudibranch looking this way, but also looking this way, same animal. So it's a shapeshifter, and there's a lot of neurological research going on with these nudibranchs because their brains are simple enough and their brain cells are big enough that scientists are able to tease out how certain brain cells connect to certain kinds of behavior with animals like this. So this Tritonia is being very carefully researched at Friday Harbor Marine and has been for years. Wanted to photograph these for probably 8 years. They're sea spiders, pinkagonids. I heard about them a long time ago, but it took a long time before I was actually introduced to them. And they look like little line drawings, I think. They're beautiful little marine sea spiders. There's 2 of them here superimposed, looking like a snowflake or some such thing, a star. Very impressed now, back to the marine worms again. These are some worm tubes that a particular kind of marine worm builds out of sand grains and a kind of mortar-like material that it secretes. But not any sand grain will do. A lot of research has actually been done on these. They're very picky about which sand grain goes where. They're like little masons, like little artisans. And this is the animal that lives inside. It's called a phoronid, and it's its own phyla. It's a particular animal that's unlike any other. And this is called an ice cream cone worm. It was staying inside its tube here, but you can really see how these sand grains are it's like masonry. It's just beautiful. I mean, it reminded me of the beautiful walls in Peru at Sacsayhuaman. I mean, this beautiful way that everything fits together so beautifully. Who would think, So here is Gustav again, telling everybody that he needs an arm extension because he's reaching down in the sand flats at low tide on San Juan Island, trying to find a particular marine worm that he just couldn't even describe, called the Diapatra, ornate tube worm. And he was pretty sure that he could feel it, but he didn't. It's very tricky getting these worms up in one piece. You can't just pull, because they'll just discorporate. And it kept going deeper. And the students kept, and rain more torrential than today's even there. Everyone was wet. You can see he's not wearing a raincoat because that's just his style. But so the students were trying to dig the hole bigger so that he could get down more easily. And finally he was able to pull this carefully, gently, this worm out of the sand. And so he's showing it here to the students. And the tube is kind of like parchment. I have that part of the tube on my dashboard too, because he took the tube off, and this is the worm. that lives inside that tube called a Diapatra. It's just phenomenal. I think it's more amazing than anything Pixar could come up with. But then again, maybe Pixar gets some of its inspiration from this realm of life. I wouldn't be surprised. I know that James Cameron got quite a bit of inspiration from marine invertebrates for Avatar. I found that out from a friend who's a movie director who happens to know that that's the case. So that's good. This is another tube-building marine worm called a feather duster. So you can see the feeding tentacles, but then the tube is there just festooned with green algae. This is another one of those crabs that collect stuff. And this one was just such a mess. It really liked everything the same color. And it just wanted to look like a mess, I think. And I kept trying to clean up the space around, so a nice white bottom and everything. It was hopeless. So I thought, well, that's part of who this animal is. It's a mess, so I'm just going to let it be a mess. And this is a close-up. So this is the eye. Right in the middle, you can, but it's not so easy to tell. And this is an animal that I collected. It's, a common mussel. But I saw it in a tide pool, and what I loved was the patterning on the shell. I thought, it's just beautiful somehow. And then I photographed it closer and realized that these are all little animals. They're little tube-building worms and bryozoans, and the largest one that you see is a scallop. And my editor at Abrams in New York, my publisher, Andrea Dinez, said, oh, I want an evening gown that looks like that. I said, well, maybe that can be arranged. This is the ornate Latiris from the Central Pacific. Again, beautiful shell, but look at this incredible animal that lives inside. Another mollusk from Central Pacific, and this is a pom-pom crab from the Central Pacific. And these crabs, they collect anemones. They use them like little boxing gloves. And the anemones have stinging tentacles, which of course is a good defense for the crab. And then the anemones also get mobility and tail scraps out of the deal. But those anemones stay put. I mean, it's not like you just picks them up and then sets them down. They're part of the crab. It's pretty cool. This is a cone snail. Probably some of you are familiar with these. The shells are highly prized. This is called a textile cone. But here's the animal. They're quite dangerous, these animals. This is from the Central Pacific. This little part here, this little point, is like a little spear. And it's filled with venom that's toxic to humans. And so one has to be very careful how you handle these, if you handle them at all. You must handle them from the opposite end. This is another one of the new species that's been described that I photographed on that French frigate Shoals expedition. It was from somewhere between 800 feet and 1,000 feet down. You can hardly tell it's a crab. You can see the two eyes there. But it's been described as a new species to science. It's called the Wana crab. This was a memorable experience for me because I was on the research vessel. Gustav came up to me. It was our very first expedition together in 2006. He came up to me with a mason jar full of water, and I just met him, and he said, well, if you can photograph this, you can photograph anything. And I looked at it, and I said, I don't see anything in there. And he just smiled and walked away. And I thought, he's obviously a trickster. What's this all about? So I walked out on the deck, and there was sun shining, and I was holding up this jar, and finally I saw these little shapes like swimming around in there. I thought, oh my God, they're like transparent little animals of some kind. This is what they were. They're called Venus's girdles, and they're really hard to photograph, but I did it. Very interesting story with these animals. There's this one, this beautiful yellow one, and this one. You can see the similarity. They're mantis shrimp, and they have the best vision of any animal known. We have color receptors. Humans have color receptors, 3 sets of rods and cones. These animals have 16. And they also can see 360 degrees without turning their heads. They can see, I think, fluorescent. They can see amazing things that we can't even imagine. And so I really have spent a lot of time trying to imagine what they can see, and I know I'm not the only one. And then this one has the additional adaptive advantage of having a rear end that looks like a stinging urchin. Handy. So very well defended animals, quite amazing. This is another green urchin from around San Juan Island. These are impossibly long ribbon worms that can stretch themselves so long. They can stretch themselves longer than the largest whale. So they're fabulous in their own right. See what I'm saying about the worms? They're cool. There's one over. This is a beautiful sea cucumber called the leopard sea cucumber from the Central Pacific. This is a close-up, so I was really often enamored with the design, just the designs that, which are often quite abstract. And this is the wide-thumbed skeleton shrimp, really cool little animal that lives on San Juan Island, around San Juan Island. And this is a frilled dog whelk. This is another one of those very ethereal, kind of diaphanous nudibranchs. It's a little hard to see projected, frosted nudibranch. This is a necklace worm, and the fuzzy crab, and another anemone, and it just goes on and on. And the diamondback nudibranch. And this is, we're probably all familiar with scallops, but all those little shiny spots are eyes. And I asked Dr. Alan Cohn, who's an expert on these, I said, why do scallops have so many eyes? And he said, because they don't have necks. And I was like, oh, he's telling me a joke, okay. This is a conch, a spider conch. Again, these shells are well known, but the animal's not often seen. So you can see the eye there, and the foot is just coming out because he's gonna take a leap any second. This is a marble shrimp, and one of my favorite of the collector crabs. This one, I liked his style. And all living algae, nice red, green. I thought I did a good job. This is a giant spider conch. You can see the eye just emerging to kind of check out the tank because it's in an unusual environment. And then he puts out his foot and boom, he's gone. He's off and running. This is another beautiful, beautiful nudibranch that graces the title page of the book, in fact. And this is a very ancient animal called a leaf-foot shrimp evolutionarily, so scientists get very excited about these kinds of things because they're virtually unchanged from millions and millions of years ago. This is a female here. This is an 18-scaled worm. Really neat the way it's made with these little kind of bits of armor. And these are nudibranchs that are they're masquerading a little bit as sea cucumbers, called sea cucumber nudibranchs. This is a clown nudibranch, and this is the first time, and probably the only time so far, that I tried to photograph an animal inside the egg prior to hatching. Maybe more of this ahead. But these are little squid inside the egg case, and this is just right after emerging from the egg case. And this was a drama that I was not anticipating. This is called a leaf flatworm. Looks a lot like a leaf, so it's aptly named. And then this is a little nudibranch, separate, I thought, but they were in the same tray as I was photographing them. And right before my lens, the leaf flatworm engulfed, this is a collage that I put together afterwards. The leaf flatworm engulfed the nudibranch and consumed it. And I ran running with the scientists on the NOAA vessel. I said, this flatworm seems to have eaten the nudibranch. And they're like, yeah, flatworms are carnivores. That's what they do. And they have enzymes. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm glad flatworms aren't the size of double beds, or we'd all be in trouble. Consumed by enzymes. This is another wonderful decorator crab. This guy liked brown, obviously. This guy liked red knee pads, different. Part of it, is what's available to be had, but they also clearly have preferences. Some of the students were doing research on this. Pretty fun. This is a plankton tow. So this was on the NOAA, or not the NOAA research vessel, rather the Centennial at Friday Harbor Marine Lab. And the vessel would go at a slow pace and drag this apparatus that you see here, collecting animals from the water column. And Sylvia Earle likes to discuss, she likes to talk about, in this beautiful way, how the water in the ocean is literally alive. And it is, in healthy places. So Dr. Alan Cohn is looking at what was brought in the plankton tow in this gallon jar here, and this is just a little inkling of the animals that live in the water column. And the water is literally alive, as long as it's a healthy marine ecosystem. This is a purple-ringed top snail. You know, surprises happen. I was wanting to do a portrait of the snail, and before I knew it, it was laying eggs. I thought, it was just doing what it does. I thought, well, that's kind of great. So, I had a surprise. These are the eggs. This was another really huge lesson for me. It was toward the end of the field work on San Juan Island. I was out with the students and scientists. People were looking for things. And I heard a lot of yelling, and people were all excited about something and coming together to look at something. And I ran over, and Gustav said, "This is a giant flatworm. It's the largest flatworm in the world," so you can see how big it is. And to me, it looked like a brown blob, but they were extremely excited about it because they're rare. He'd never seen one before. He knew what it was. Not easy to find, impossible to find if you just go out and look for one. But so it was considered to be quite a prize. And he said, "Susan, don't you want to photograph this?" And I was like, I don't know if there's anything I really do with this, because, you know, in a photograph you can't tell how big something is. So the fact that it's a giant flatworm may be all very well and good, but in the photograph you're not going to really see that. It's going to look like a brown blob. I'm not saying this, but this is what's going through my head. But then I realized this is a really important animal. I should probably try. And then Gustav said, "Well, take it back to the lab, but you have to promise to bring it back to this exact location tomorrow morning under this rock." And I said, "Okay, I'll do all that." And then I went back to the lab and put it in the tank, and oh my God, everyone, all the students, scientists were coming from all the other labs. No one could believe what this flatworm could do with its body. I mean, it was like a contortionist. And it was completely unprovoked. I mean, it just started shaping its body in all of these different ways. And it was just so beautiful. So this turns out to be a very favorite picture because of that, because I almost dismissed it, and who would have ever known. The other thing that was so cool is that we realized that we were probably the only humans to ever witness this, ever. So there's a lot of revelations, surprises, discoveries to make in this realm of life, because it's not known as well. And a lot of it has to do with seeing and observation and patience, and being with the right people who can help expose you, because I would have never even found that animal. This is a day octopus from the Central Pacific, and I'm very enamored with octopus, as I'm sure many of you are as well. I've talked to a few of you before the talk. And this is a baby octopus. This is the same creature that's on the cover of the book. It's a juvenile Pacific giant octopus, the largest octopus species in the world, from around Friday Harbor. Absolutely the most gorgeous animal I've ever photographed. I just couldn't believe it. And I worked with it for over 3 days with a woman who did her PhD thesis on these animals, so she really knew how to keep it happy in a captive situation, and then I was able to actually release it. This is a close-up of an octopus eye, and all of these dots are chromatophores. Some of you probably know about chromatophores. They're little sacs of pigment. Octopus sort of wear their hearts on their sleeves, so they communicate vis-a-vis these little sacs of pigment, which are connected through their nervous system directly to their brain, and so these patterns change. And this octopus can go completely white faster than the eye can track. And it's amazing what they can do, change their colors and patterns. And this is with the eye closed, sleeping. This is a type of animal called a chitin, which is related to octopus. It's part of the cephalopod phyla. And they're kind of short on the behavior spectrum. So with an octopus, you have inexhaustible number of gestures that these animals can do. With a chitin, it's kind of limited. They attach themselves to rocks, hard substrates, but they're beautiful little jewels unto themselves. So I photographed a lot of different kinds of chitins here. And this is that stalk jelly where you can see the stalk. You can actually see how it attaches to the seaweed here. And this is the same animal photographed on black and sea stars, lots of different kinds of sea stars. And these are, I'm going to conclude my presentation with a little suite of images of hermit crabs. And this hermit crab is actually living in a sponge. This is a live sponge. Most hermit crabs will find a shell, but this particular one, the white-hand hermit, found a sponge, and that was working pretty nicely for both parties. And more hermits, lots of hermits. These are the same species, but very different kinds of shell homes that they've selected. Again, these are all the same species, but a lot of this has to do with shells that are available to be had. And in many places, it's limited. So these animals have to kind of make do. This crab found an absolutely gorgeous textile cone. That's a very fancy house that particular crab has selected there. But then this one on the bottom, that's kind of a mangled shell, but it seems to be working until they find something better. And that's kind of how it goes in the world of hermit crabs. I call this the nudist. This is what a hermit crab looks like without a sponge or a shell, up in the upper left. So that's the abdomen, and there's little hooks at the end that it will attach. It can attach to the inside of the shell. And this is the same animal, coveting this shell that I introduced into the aquarium and quickly jumped inside. They're very vulnerable when they don't have protection because that's very soft, that abdomen part. And this is the final image of my presentation. It's called the Dardanus. So he's got a shell, he's got 3 anemones that are closed here, he's got a 2-building worm on his shell, and a very rare barnacle that the scientists were a lot more excited about the rare barnacle than they were about the crab. So the one thing I'd like to say before I open it to questions and signing, if anyone would like, is that in the process of doing this, I learned a lot about marine invertebrates. And one of the expeditions that I was on in the Central Pacific, we were all crammed in this kind of limited space of the wet lab on the ship. And the person that was working right next to me was a NOAA scientist, and he had all of these test tubes, and he was collecting water from various depths in the mid-Pacific and testing it for acidity levels, pH. And he was a NOAA scientist, and he was specifically looking at ocean acidification. And so we got to talking, and I was asking him about it because I didn't know so much about it then. And he was very alarmed at what he was finding because the momentum of the acidified oceans was much greater than what scientists had initially predicted. And the animals that are first affected are the invertebrates because they depend utterly on calcium carbonate for their survival, especially the mollusks and the corals. But they all do, like the hermit crabs can't survive without the shells that are made of calcium carbonate. And the animals that make those shells extract the calcium from the water. And if there's less of it in the water, they have a harder time laying down their shells. And that's happening, that's being documented. And then once their shells are laid down, in acidified waters, the acid will dissolve the shells. That's a pretty simple chemistry experiment. So these animals are at risk, and I often think that if they could speak, they would cry out for help. So I'm trying to kind of be their voice here as well. If there are any questions or comments, I would love to hear them. Thank you. Yes?
The specimen that got eaten by the flatworm?
Yeah! Oh my God.
What are those specimens you get using?
That was a nudibranch. That was a little spotted nudibranch, and the name of that particular nudibranch is in the book. I was going to photograph the nudibranch as another one of my subjects, but it was consumed too quickly by the leaf flatworm. Yeah. They look really beautiful and delicate, those flatworms, but I think they're fearsome predators, obviously. Yes?
Some of the nudibranchs can eat sea anemones and put the nematocysts into their gills.
You're absolutely right. Yep.
But the other thing, it was a comment that 43 years ago in invertebrate studies, we were told about the release of carbonic acid from the burning of fossil fuels, and mainly coal, and how this would happen as the ocean is acidified. This isn't news. And it's taken so long for the governments to act on this. It's tragic.
No, I agree. I'm not going to paraphrase you because you said it better than I could. But it's true. It's not news. it's becoming news. Oh,
Yeah, it's not new.
but it's not new. It was known. And you know, what I thought was interesting too was that it's actually easier to document in the water, in the ocean, than it is in the terrestrial environment, because it's a much simpler sort of chemistry experiment. And there's a lot of research going on all around the world in different places. But the place that I know best is Friday Harbor Marine Lab and on those NOAA vessels. And there's research going on both those vessels. And at Friday Harbor, there's a whole ocean acidification part of the lab now. They've got a big chunk of funding for that. But it's also affecting industries like the oyster industry. Oysters aren't thriving like they used to. I mean, it's, you know, a lot of us love to eat oysters, myself included. But the animals themselves, I mean, we depend on them too. That's the thing, is that I'll tell you a little story about the title of the book. I was with Sylvia Earle, who I've known since Academy days, and Sandy remembers her well too, when she was an expert in algae. That was what her expertise was when she was a young scientist, and she had an office at the Academy of Sciences in the late 70s before she became internationally famous. But I've known her for all that time, and in 2012 we were out on Midway Atoll together, and we were taking a walk on the beach, and I was in the final stages of doing field work for this book, and she was asking me about it. She said, "What are you thinking in terms of a title?" And I said, "Spineless, Portraits of Marine Invertebrates, the Backbone of Life in the Sea." And she said, "No, it's Portraits of Marine Invertebrates, the Backbone of Life, period. It's not just in the sea." Because we depend utterly on the ocean for our survival. And we depend on a healthy ocean ecosystem. And the whole ocean ecosystem, the foundation, 98% of the described species in the ocean are invertebrates. And as my scientist colleagues explained to me, that actual number is probably closer to 99.9 because there's so many of the invertebrates that haven't even been described yet or discovered. So they form the foundation for all of life on our planet. And we're really connected to them evolutionarily too. It's really, really cool to start understanding how we're connected, and that's what I write about in the text in the book. But I was enthralled initially by their utter strangeness, their aesthetic. I was approaching them as an artist, but then I realized how connected we are as humans to them, and how much we depend on them, and they need our help. They need our conscious protection at this stage of the game. And it's kind of like we need them, we need to save them to save ourselves. I mean, that's kind of how it really shapes up. Yeah.
Anyone else? One more?
I did have one more comment.
Yep.
That we also have to take into account the phytoplankton. We're terrestrial species. We think about trees producing our oxygen, but it's not the trees. It's the plants in the ocean that produce the oxygen we breathe. If we screw up the ocean, which we're doing, we don't have anything to breathe.
That's a wonderful concluding comment. In the foreword to the book, Sylvia Earle talks about how interconnected that we live in this world of connectivity, and she kind of she kind of maps that out, and she talks about the phytoplankton. And then there's one sentence in the book, at the end of that paragraph, she says, "Do you like to breathe?"
So far.
What a way to ask.